Hello, dear viewer, can you feel the excitement in my voice? Because I have made like 100 Skyrim builds or so, and apparently there are still new horizons and new combos to explore. This build is stupidly exciting to me. I couldn't believe how well it worked. It's a heavily armored Alteration mage, a telekinetic prodigy, a skillful hand-to-hand fighter, and a magic tank. All these poor villains of Skyrim are in for a very hard time. They will be constantly staggered, thrown into the air, stumbling and losing their weapons and losing their ground, and it is going to be awesome. Okay, it does come with a set of innate problems, as we won't be able to deal high damage. There just isn't any room for that, but it's okay, as the ABJURER actually prefers to minimize bloodshed if possible. His magic specialization as well as his personality makes him focus entirely on defense, both defending himself from damage and defending the citizens against evil creatures and bandits and the like. His worldview is simple: if something bothers you, grab it by the face and hurl it into oblivion, but don't necessarily kill it. And always push the world harder than it pushes you. So many a times you will run into a dungeon with a sole purpose of fulfilling your quest objective and not much else. If it's an item you are after, just throw everyone away with telekinesis, paralyze them or cover them with ash or whatever it takes to incapacitate them, and then take the item. If it's a person or creature to slay, you have two options. After everything is paralyzed, of course, you can punch your target to the death, preferably after destroying their armor rating with marks for death, shout and corrosion spell, or you can just throw items at them after you have the appropriate alteration perk unlocked. Mid-game you will also have a third option from the advanced alteration model, levitating the enemy and then detonating them with a barrier spell. It is quite unfortunately that most of these flashy options require a sizable magicka pool or some perk point investment. It means surviving the early game depends on a strong follower, leveling up your alteration fast, and getting that guaranteed stuff of paralysis from the Snaplek cave. So maybe don't torture yourself by starting the playthrough on legendary difficulty. The power gain curve is rather steep for this one. Early in the game it will be hard even on master or maybe even on expert. Late in the game it will be boring without switching up to legendary. After you have the telekinesis spell and a few shouts unlocked, and your heavy armor has a few left-hand side perks, you can safely speed level your enchanting in a beeline to the extra effect. It is rather necessary for this build to get double enchantments, even though we also use a few pre-enchanted uniques. All of these are to be found on Solstheim, so visit the island at your first convenience. Before you can double enchant, it will be best for you to wear most of the Ahzidal armor set pieces, as both runes and wards are crucial to your survival, and the chance to paralyze your attackers synergizes very well with a few heavy armor perks from Vokrii. Sorry for the lengthy introduction, but the early game for a build like this is a little bit weird, and I thought I needed to throw in some advice on that. We can proceed with the mods, which is another thing that makes me quite happy and a tad proud about the build, as all its crazy crowd control and durability requires only 4 relatively minimalistic mods: Vokrii, Summermyst, Advanced Alteration, and Odin Magic Overhaul. You can even skip Odin, as the spells from this mod will be needed mostly at a very specific stage of the playthrough, since late 20s say, until extra effect is taken. You can quite easily substitute them with shouts and paralysis spells. The only real problem you may encounter without Odin is that your Whirlwind Cloak will need to be cast manually at the start of a fight, which means you may need to take the mastery perk in Destruction to reduce its casting cost. It's not that much of a hassle, I don't think. I'm wearing the Ahzidal's armor, retextured with Ahzidal's armor set, my version, which basically just applies the wonderful texture from Nord War's heavy Nordic armor to the Ahzidal's set. And the hood is the white Tribunal hood from Immersive Armors, but it also exists as a much smaller standalone mod, Tribunal Robes and Masks. The attributes ratio is 1 point in stamina per 2 in health per 1 in magicka. You can skew it a little bit more towards magicka, but with the Atronach Stone, Alter Self, and some enchantments it will become more than you need anyway. Your punching would be much more effective with more stamina, but since it is a just-in-case thing for this build used sparsely and supplemented by crowd control and debuffs, I figured it's better to use Strength Leech spell to absorb stamina from nearby enemies when needed, or simply healing yourself with the Respite perk unlocked. And the race is a Breton and the standing stone is the Atronach. Look, I know it's overused, but with a character devoting his entire life to becoming untouchable, protected and a protector, the spell absorption and the magic resistance we can build up with this combo is pretty much inevitable. Also, I'm just having fun here, just leave me alone, alright? Now, for the skills, Alteration and Heavy Armor are going to be the absolute cornerstones of the build, with almost every perk bringing a lot of power to the table and contributing to your immense durability and to your scary combos, followed swiftly by Enchanting and Light Armor, with the former being responsible for your endgame loadout, of course, but also for enhancing your staff play, and the latter being used for unarmed combat perks exclusively so it doesn't collide with your heavy armor in any way. Smithing was perked to maximize the armor rating and to improve the Ahzidal's armor bits. Then some restoration perks to enhance your wards, especially that you will use the staff of Hasedoki, granting you a permanent ward. The staff will get overshadowed by the Telekinesis spell once you unlock the Telekinetic Prodigy perk, allowing you to toss people and creatures with dual-cast Telekinesis. But before that, the staff and some levitation runes is going to do a lot of work for you. Even after the perk is taken, the staff and levitation rune are still going to be the more cost-effective option, requiring less magicka, so you may want to keep it in mind if there is a lot of enemies around and you expect a longer fight. So in Alteration, we take most perks in the middle, and on the right hand side we take the telekinetic branch in its entirety and dual casting so that we can throw enemies with telekinesis. Dual casting will eventually result in another protective ward each time you cast most of your spells, since the cost of your spells will be reduced enough to make dual casting every Alteration spell a viable option. And the end game restoration perk is granting you that special ward when dual casting. We also take all 3 ranks of magic resistance to stack with the natural Breton resistance for a total of 55% of resistance. You can add an enchanted item on top of that, but in the late game, with your spell absorption reaching an 80% chance and your elemental resistance against at least 2 elements being capped, that 55% seems more than enough. Alter Self is used to raise your magicka, combining with the Atronach Stone to the total of 75 extra points. Since most of your spells will eventually get their cost reduced to peanuts, this is again more than enough. Early to mid-game you should consider a Blessing of Julianos and some Fortify magicka items though. The other rank of Alter Self was used for frost and shock resistances, combined with enchantments to reach the cap on both elements. When heading against fire-wielding enemies, you can max out your spell absorption with the Dragon Skin racial power. And for the sake of the absorption, we obviously also take the Atronach perk, meaning with the Atronach Stone we get a constant 80% chance to absorb incoming spells. We then go for the Hethot's Escape, which paralyzes an enemy capable of dealing a killing strike to you once every 10 minutes. The Ahzidal's armor will provide you with another chance to paralyze melee attackers, whether or not they are capable of taking you down in one hit. This is going to be your last resort for the very rare situations an enemy can break through your many other defenses. In Heavy Armor we take all the perks on the left hand branch and most on the right. Immovable Object, adding a 10% chance for a melee attacker to stagger when hitting you, is even nicer than usual when you also have a separate role to paralyze them. Even the early game Battle Fatigue perk can be abused nicely with the Strength Leech spell. The perk makes you take 20% less damage from low stamina enemies, and the spell absorbs their stamina at a rather alarming rate, depleting the attribute entirely in most cases after a few seconds. Face of the Mountain is, as always, wonderful. 25% chance to throw melee attackers to the ground passively is even more satisfying when your power punches also have a 50% chance to stagger and some smaller chance to disarm. Heavily Armored Unarmed Fighter is a nice build itself in Vokrii, but we have way more many great many interesting options here. On the right, we go for the Tower of Strength to reduce the damage intake from power attacks, or if you still feel like you are not protected enough against spells, you may go for the Elemental Defense as well. It's only 15% resistance, and 2 out of 3 elemental resistances are going to be capped regardless, but if you are heading against a fire-breathing dragon, or maybe your dragon skin power is on cooldown, this perk plus the Resist Elements spell can amount to a 50% resistance to fire, worth considering but not necessary. Do remember to take the Face of Death perk only after you can craft your late game gear, double enchanted items. Until that point, Ahzidal's Helm of Vision should be your headgear of choice. With double enchantments, you need to wear a hood and or a circlet, as these items can carry the Amplify Alteration enchantments. Now we need to talk about the enchanting skill. Yes, I know, double enchantments are overpowered. Ooh, Belly, you always make crafting builds. Oh no, this skill is the easiest in the game to max out, but I still feel like it's too grindy for me. I just want to become a god button. Sorry. Other than Armor Enchanter, Regalia Enchanter and Extra Effect, we take the Staff perks too. Power Stone only needs 1 rank, it doesn't affect the Staff of Hasedoki in any way other than increasing the duration of its Soul Trap, which is definitely not worth perk points. The perk can be a tad useful for your early game Paralyzed Staff though. Mana Stone won't be that useful either, but the cost reduction of charges is rather handy for the Staff of Hasedoki, which normally runs out of charges all the time. Yes, you could use a Black Star, yes, to always have a soul in store for recharging, but there is already enough micromanagement with this build given the sheer amount of spells he uses, so the recharge over time guaranteed by Staff Recharge seems like a decent idea. Marked the perk as optional just in case you have some better ideas for this perk point. But most importantly, as early as skill level of 70, you can unlock the Mana Shield, which makes you 25% more resistance to all attack damage when wielding a staff, which stacks with the damage reduction of the ward the Staff of Hasedoki gives you with the Vigilant Ward perk. Damage reduction is not armor rating, it is counted separately, and you will reach the armor rating cap with some smithing involved, so you will hardly ever be in danger with all that on, even on legendary. Ward perks in Restoration will definitely help with that too. With both ranks of Vigilant Ward, they will cost peanuts in Magicka and negate another 60% of incoming physical damage. With Mage Ward, you will get a ward every time you dual cast a spell. This special ward will only be half as effective as normal wards, so only 30% physical damage reduction is only. Still, mighty useful for all those times when you can run around like a madman tossing everyone around with dual cast telekinesis. Mercy is quite useful for low Magicka characters, or in this case for a character who can't afford to reduce restoration spell cost. Just wait until you are low on health and then cast your cheap early game fast healing spell twice. Optionally for the aforementioned stamina management difficulties, you may also go for Respite. It seems to me Strength Leech spell is a better option, but maybe just in case you wish to get some health and stamina back at the same time, it is worth taking. Then we need the entire unarmed combat branch in light armor for the situations when you absolutely need to kill. It is not fully optimized for this build. We use only one fortified unarmed item, we don't have enough stamina or stamina regen to make the best of the Iron Fist perk, and we are not a Khajiit. But with Marked for Death and Orc's Strength spells, maybe a few other debuff spells like Enfeeble, it can be good enough. Optimally, you can paralyze your target, use Dragon Aspect Shout, then Marked for Death Shout, and then Corrosion or Dire Corrosion spell, and only after all that is done, start punching ahead. On Legendary, some fights may still drag on a little bit. Repeating casting of Strength Leech may be necessary, especially that you deal more damage with your punches when your stamina is high. Finally, in smithing, we need the Arcane Blacksmith and Advanced Armors to fully improve your gear. Arcane Blacksmith may be everything you need on lower difficulty levels, especially with some fortified smithing items and potions, but on Legendary, do the whole thing. 3 fortified smithing items you can make yourself with the Ahzidal's Armor plus 10 to Enchanting and an Enchanter's Elixir, then use a Blacksmith's Elixir and all these perks and items you made. Let's start the gear section with a friendly reminder that the early to mid-game loadout is quite different to what you are about to see in a caption. You need to wear Ahzidal's gauntlets, armor and helm, and the remaining items need Fortify Magicka or Fortify Alteration and Magic Resistance, the best ones you can lay your hands on. And also get a Staff of Paralysis as soon as you can. This way you can paralyze everything without a worry about your Magicka. After your enchanting is maxed, some Enchanter's Elixirs are obtained and the full set of Ahzidal's armor is worn, you can move on to crafting your amazing endgame set, which is comprised of the Staff of Hasedoki and maybe a spare Staff of Paralysis, Ahzidal's armor of Retribution, Ahzidal's gauntlets of Warding, Amplify Alteration and Fortify Alteration Circlet, Fortify Alteration and Magicka Region Hood, Amplify Alteration and Deadly Reach Necklace, Fortify Unarmed and Link Health and Magicka Ring, and a Resist Shock and Resist Frost Boots. And yes, the Tribunal Hood allows a circlet to be worn with it, and I feel no shame or remorse for abusing it. The Deadly Reach enchantment on your necklace makes the Ahzidal's helm obsolete, as you can now place your runes at any distance. A very funny mini game to play is to place a levitation or a paralysis rune behind approaching enemies and then try to throw them into that rune with the Staff of Hasedoki. You have 2 instances in total of Fortify Alteration and Amplify Alteration enchantments. This makes your telekinesis spell even dual cast more than manageable, and your slow time, shout and paralysis effects last for more than twice their normal duration. You have the rare Link Health and Magicka enchantment. It may take some time before you find one, which increases both attributes by 1/4 of the other attribute, which with your relatively high health solves any possible remaining problems with Magicka management you may still face when constantly dual casting. The Magicka region offsets the penalty of the Atronach Stone, and 2 elemental resistances on the boots may seem a little bit boring and vanilla, but nothing else really suits the concept, while Frost and Shock are dangerous to your stamina and Magicka bars, and at least both these resistances will be at the effective cap at all times. Now for the spells, and honestly this guy seems to be a little bit too invested in Alteration, a little bit obsessed. Most spells from that school will be useful to him at some point, but let's just look at the main frequently used ones for the finished build. Just in case you don't feel protected enough late game, you can open up a combat with Dragonhide to max out your physical damage protection on top of the maxed out armor rating. Because it's still not enough, the autocast Whirlwind Cloak will periodically send the enemies away. Focused Barrier is a bit like a ward, except it works against physical damage and it sends out a little staggering force wave when you stop holding it up or when it's interrupted by a hit or a lack of magicka or something. This wave can be abused to trigger your rune spells remotely or to deal damage to enemies levitated by the levitation rune, and of course to slow down approaching enemies. There are also lower level variants of this spell, so one crucial combo of levitation rune and a force wave should be available quite early. Just for fun, I also use the barricade spell to close the passages and hallways behind me so that all the enemies whose lives I spared can't catch up with me too easily to punish my goodwill. To weaken the enemies you need to punch down, I suggest the aforementioned combo of Dragon Aspect, Mark for Death and Feeble Spell and the Dire Corrosion spell. This prevents magicka regeneration, removes hundreds of armor rating, creates a chance for enemies to drop their weapons, and makes you better at absolutely everything. There is also a rather exciting combo of Strength Leech and Enfeeble. As mentioned, the Leech spell can deplete the enemy stamina fast, while Enfeeble prevents its regeneration for over 100 seconds. A warrior without stamina cannot power attack and deals 20% less damage to you. But of course, your main and most satisfying spell is the fully perked Telekinesis, allowing you to defeat bosses with some sweet rolls and pretty much anything that lies around. There is much more cool things to use. Some amazing utility spells are made available by both Odin and Advanced Alteration, like the Slow Fall, Control Weather, or Momentum, which enhances your movement speed by quite a lot. But that is the gist of it. The video is already a little bit too long, I feel, so let's leave something for you to explore. Let's sum up and let's look at it from the perspective of a common bandit. So a guy in full plate armor but with no weapons runs into your den and starts throwing shit around, including some of your friends. So you unsheath your weapon and charge in. Soon you discover that a protective spell surrounds the intruder and that spell hurls you away into the corner. You complain, you whine, you stand up and try again. This time you manage to land a hit, but you suddenly feel your entire body becomes numb and stiff, and you fall down slowly to the ground. It's already quite scary, but after a few seconds you regain control over your body and try to attack again. Now you land a hit again, but that madman makes a slight tiny movement, causing your weapon to slide down his armor and you losing your balance, and now you fall down again. Now at this point I would just lose faith and run away, but Skyrim NPCs are more stubborn than that, so they will repeat this cycle of failures until you decide to paralyze them or get rid of them in some of your aforementioned creative ways. This is one of my favorite builds I've ever made, and certainly my favorite this year. It's relatively cost-effective, as it can be finished at level 47 if you ignore the optional perks. It can survive everything. It may be a little bit annoying to fight dragons without a huge damage dealer though, so remember the dragon rend and take a good archer friend with you against those. Remember about the early game challenges as well. After those are dealt with, you will be rewarded manifold for your patience. And I believe we are done here. Like, share and subscribe, support me via Subscribestar and or super thanks if you can, of course, and we will totally see each other again, guys and girls. Bye bye.